Good morning, afternoon and evening, depending on where you're from. And welcome to today's panel discussion on a topic that's both timely and critical. So leadership vulnerability, how openness can foster trust, inclusion, and well-being. So it's a pretty big mouthful there. My name is Rod Hutchings from Melbourne, Australia. It's nice and midnight here. I'm an Air Force human resource officer and a hacking HR leader. So this topic, experience really shows that when leaders are authentic themselves, that creates a culture where everyone feels valued and empowered to thrive. So today's panel, we'll discuss vulnerability with leadership, look at how we define that, discuss benefits, and share some practical strategies and tips. So if we can bring forward our panelists, please. And welcome and thank you, everyone. So if we'll just start with some introductions, and we'll just go virtually around the room clockwise. So I think we'll start. I can't. With who's next to me? I've got the window too small, so I actually can't see the names.
Well, I can go first, Rod, since I'm right next to you.
Yes, exactly.
Good greetings, everyone. I am Dr. Gina Davis. I am a organizational psychologist and executive coach and founder and CEO of True Synergy, Inc. We are a people and culture management consulting company based in Los Angeles, California, and we're absolutely thrilled to be here with all of you this morning, this afternoon, and this evening.
Thank you, Gina, and welcome. And Tammy, hello again.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. My name is Tammy Chapik. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called We Inspire We. And we're basically, I call us a leadership disruption company, because we believe that the pathway to great leadership is not how everybody else does it. It's how you do it with your authenticity and style.
And Carol.
Hello, everyone. My name's Carol Cooley, and I'm a human resource executive based in Denver, Colorado. My background is primarily working in organizations in the financial services and healthcare sectors, and also some technology. So I have a lot of experience in working with a variety of leadership teams, trying to bring forth authentic leadership that really fosters a great culture and a great environment where people can thrive.
Thanks, Carol, and welcome, Vera.
Yeah, thank you for having me. My name is Vera Mack. I'm actually based in Switzerland, so for me it's more the afternoon, adding to time zones here. I am the director for talent practices for Beyond Gravity, an aerospace technology company based in Switzerland. And my role is as director of talent practices, also taking part or creating all the leadership programs. So obviously vulnerability and leadership is something that we're also discussing and that we want to bring back to our company. This is still on the roadmap for 2024. So I'm very happy to use this also as a kickoff point for that.
Excellent. So thanks, everyone, and welcome once again. So I thought we'd start the conversation today with let's just start defining a little bit about what we mean by leadership vulnerability. And to kick us off, I'll ask Gina to just start the conversation about defining what leadership vulnerability means in the context of work, in the work situation. So you want to start us off, Gina?
No problem. And it's Dr. Gina. So thank you so much, everybody. And thank you for that question. So in my work, I look at leadership vulnerability. It's a powerful tool, something that we as leaders should always be using. It is an opportunity for us to build trust and foster inclusion and promoting overall well-being for everyone within your organization. So that's how I defined it in a nutshell.
Thanks, Gina. Does anyone want to add on to that? Just unpack it a bit more?
Of course, I'll add on a little bit. For me, when I think of leadership vulnerability, although it's not exactly the same, I think of a level of transparency that's required in, having that level of openness where a leader wants to share, communicate openly and authentically, and invite, more conversation, and two-way listening is also a part of that for me. I think that's one of the things when you think about how do we start that? You're not going to just start with vulnerability, but what are some ways that you can start to get there? I think
Mm.
having that level of transparency and open two-way communication and listening are really foundational to creating that openness culture, and setting the foundation for inclusion and well-being.
Thanks, Carol.
I just want to add to, I think, yes
Yeah.
and yes. I feel like I'm always just adding because such great content from everybody on these panels. But, I think it's important to think about vulnerability as a level of humanity. I think in the workforce, we tend to come in, especially as leaders, we want to be so professional and put together and know our stuff and have our act together and all the things and set this great example that we want people to model and emulate. But we have to remember at the end of the day, we're all people and we all have things that we don't know or are uncomfortable with, or things happening outside of work. And as a leader, to bring that level of vulnerability of basically humanity into the conversation can really open up the dialogue.
I think that's really well said, Tammy. I think being authentic. I think people see through when you're not doing that, for sure. Vera, you've got anything you want to share on this?
Yeah, I mean, I can only add that obviously everything that has been said is very true. For me, one part that I always like to look at when we look at vulnerability is exactly what Tammy just said, as well as like letting go of this perfectionism, because there is no such a thing as being perfect, and expecting that from anyone, whether that's being a leader or from a team member, is just something that's actually damaging culture. And with that, allowing mistakes, allowing to come forth when there is something happening, whether that's on the business side or on the private side, and being able to show that vulnerability both as an employee as well as a manager, that's what really creates a company culture where innovation can thrive, where creativity can thrive, and where people want to grow and want to be and spend time. So I think that's really important to bring that aspect into any type of leadership that one wants to display.
Yeah, thanks, Vera. Yeah, so I think we've started to define it pretty well. So I might move on to the next little question and start with you, Tammy, on this one. Is what do you think some of the common challenges leaders face when trying to be vulnerable, and what are some suggestions to overcome those common challenges?
Yeah, I think the word vulnerability is a scary word, especially some of the things we've already said around leaders have, feeling like we need to be polished and put together and know everything. And there's a lot of extra pressure put on a leader for team's performance. So vulnerability comes in and it's a scary proposition. I think when we say the word, a lot of people think that means you have to bare your soul. You have to expose all the inner ooey gooey stuff that you've been hiding or don't want other people to see, because you want to make sure you're managing their impression and perception of you. So I think, as a leader, vulnerability doesn't have to be, the depths of your soul, right? And I think, one thing to consider in the mix of vulnerability is, I think someone, maybe Carol, you said this earlier, but it's just listening, right? It's listening to what's being said, what's not being said, and being okay with sharing your own personal examples of maybe times you've struggled with those things as well, or areas that you think individuals can further explore. I think it's also being able to say, I don't know all the answers. And just, being able to use more of a collaborative environment to allow other people to then feel safe to say the same thing when they're struggling too. So it's kind of the starts to psychological safety in the workplace as well.
Yeah, and I want to add a couple of things. Yeah, just everything plus one to what Tammy said, but also vulnerability is also about being okay with making mistakes, being okay to say, I made a mistake, being authentic in saying this is who I am. Things happen. I think also I go back to building trust. And when I teach courses here, I say, well, who is the person that's supposed to be giving trust first? Is it the employees should trust the boss first, the leader first, or should a leader entrust the employees first? And I always say that it's important for your team to trust you first, because if they trust you first, they're going to have your back on things. So if they know that you're human and that you make mistakes and you're able to be open, honest about situations and be able to build that rapport with their teams, and that trust is there, then the whole team works together. I say the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And if employees don't trust you, if they don't feel that that they're seeing the real you, then you're going to have problems in the long run.
Yeah, really well said.
I would add something that's a little foundational. I think in some cases, in organizations, it's not clearly articulated that the role of the leader or the role of the manager is to serve as that conduit for communication and trust. And I think being really specific and intentional about the role that you're putting your leaders in and what the expectations are is really kind of a foundational step to building trust and creating that level playing field where leaders can find themselves in a spot where they can be more authentic and more vulnerable. So I think just really clearly articulating, hey, leaders, what we expect of you is to be that communication conduit with your team, and then helping them figure out the nuances of that role and how they can best position their team for success by fostering that trust that Dr. Gina and Tammy talked about.
Thanks,
Yeah, because
Carol.
being a leader and a manager are two separate things. So
Yeah.
can a leader be a manager? Absolutely. Can a manager lead? Absolutely. Are they two separate skill sets? Absolutely.
Yeah.
And
What
then
I'd like to
yeah, go on. Go.
Sorry, what I'd like to add here as well is because we're talking a lot about, I feel like, a step further already, right? Where you know who you are, you know what your position is. But I feel like vulnerability really starts with, as also Dr. Gina said, and Tammy briefly mentioned, it starts with being okay with yourself, being authentic, know who you are, know your values, know what you stand for, be okay with the values that your company has, and hopefully also carry them along. And I feel like that is one of the challenges that leaders face the most, is that they cannot necessarily authentically be themselves. And with that, how can you show vulnerability? And this is what I see in a lot of companies, is what I've seen and then with a lot of leaders, that the struggle doesn't come from not even having a psychologically safe environment where you can be vulnerable, but from not knowing who they want to be as a leader and as a person.
Yeah, thanks. All right, so I think we'll move on to the next question. And I might come back to you, Carol, because I think you sort of went down this line already, and that is, I guess, what's the line between being vulnerable and then sharing too much or sharing too little? There's obviously, yeah, like it's a work situation. So, what are your thoughts about that challenge?
Yeah. I think it's kind of that mix of art versus science, right? There are nuances with it, and one of the things that I think is really important is to kind of know your audience, know your team as a leader, and understand, what level of vulnerability is going to resonate with them, and where is it too much or too little. And that, as Dr. Gina mentioned, is one of those nuances and different skill sets that you may need to continue to build as you move from leader to manager or back and forth or so on. I think Tammy also hit on it earlier when she talked about, I love the ooey gooey. You don't have to unveil the darkest depths of your soul, and you don't have to talk about things that are highly personal, unless they play into the context of the work environment. You need to figure out as a leader, where is that relationship, and kind of understand where those boundaries are based on your knowledge and experience of your audience. And I think that's just it's just a hallmark of good communication, good listening. I keep coming back to that, but I think that's really one of the things that it takes time and it takes practice. And you need to, as we've already talked about, be okay with making mistakes. I also think sometimes leaders are carrying the burden of, confidential or sensitive information, either about other teammates that may be struggling through something, or about the direction of the company, especially with what we've seen in the market over the last year or so with widespread layoffs. So you can't be 100% transparent all of the time, because as a leader, you need to balance the needs of your team with the needs of the organization. And sometimes that requires you carry that heavy burden of confidentiality, whether that's for your teammates or for the organization. So I think you need to understand those boundaries as well. So like I said, from the very beginning, it's a very nuanced situation, one where you have to step in and test the waters, and be willing to say, you know what, I overstepped this time, or gee, I'm sorry, I probably could have shared more information with you, as you kind of navigate that space.
Thank you, Carol. That was everything. I don't know if I have a lot to add, but there's one thing that kind of jumped out at me when you're talking is, I think, part of the vulnerability in that line, and I love the words art and science, because I use that a lot with my clients too. Like, there are things that are science, A plus B equals C, right? Like, but there are other things that are very much situational, tapping into intuition, emotional intelligence, things like that. When it comes to vulnerability, though, I think that you have to also consider certainly the dynamics of the situation, the people you're talking to, but what's the intention, right? So if you're sharing, if you're opening up, is there intention to create more connection? Is there intention to set an example? Is there intention to seek support and help and create that safe space? So I think some of that needs to be considered in the mix, as well as like what's the intention behind it. I also want to add one comment. Someone put in the chat around, if we talk about vulnerability in the workforce, are we opening leaders up to very complex or difficult conversations? And the short answer is probably yes. But I think that's okay. That's where humanity comes back into play. And I think as a leader, we need to be comfortable asking questions where we don't know the answers, just to encourage conversation.
I'm going to add to that as well. I think it's important for leaders to be open, be vulnerable by sharing personal feelings, thoughts, perspectives around an issue or topic of concern. I think that's how we as people in organizations get to know each other better, to understand where each other is coming from. That's part of who we are as human beings. I think that when you're divulging too much, is when, if you're divulging too much information that could harm another person or exploit another person, or you might be divulging truly confidential information that can cause some sort of harm or difficulties. But the short answer is, if you are a leader, you should be willing and ready and open to be able to share information. We're in a new day. Things are different. So with that, the more open we are, the more authentic we are, the more we're willing to express our true authentic selves and our true feelings about certain things, I think you will have better, more inclusive, collaborative, emotionally intelligent, as Tammy said, organizations.
Yeah, no, that was really good. I'm just wondering, we've been speaking a lot about leaders, and I guess most organizations really aren't like a hub and spoke, where the leaders is people are normally part of broader teams. And I'm just wondering if you want to add onto that, Dr. Gina, about how vulnerability influences like the team dynamics. The leader isn't always in that. So just within the team, how does vulnerability, how does that operate, do you think?
So thank you for that question. I think in the teams that I work with organizations is the leader sets the stage, sets the foundation of that. It's through communication, it's through collaboration, it's through, okay, what is the outcome? What are we trying to achieve in this project, or this issue we're trying to solve, or this problem we're trying to solve, and setting the foundation and being that example, that true example, and making sure that there's agreement. No agreement, nothing's going to happen, nothing's going to change. So I think it's important that the leader sets the ground rule, the leader sets the stage, the leader has the communication, making sure that everyone is willing to be true, open, and honest for the sake of solving whatever issue, problem, or challenge that they're faced with.
Thanks.
I'd add to what Dr. Gina just said, a little bit around, I think, yes, it is truly the leader's responsibility to kind of set that tone from the top, and foster the opportunities for the rest of the team to create that sense of trust amongst themselves without the leader having to always be there to initiate it. Some of the things that I've found to be very effective are, giving that team an opportunity to learn about each other, what their skill sets are, what their strengths and weaknesses are, so that they can play off of each other, and they can, start from a work allocation perspective. I want to raise my hand for this. Well, great, that's your skill set. Let's move ahead and agree that you're going to do this part of that project, and I want to volunteer for the next project because that's more along the lines of my skill sets and my strengths. So I think, yes, absolutely, the leader sets that tone and sets the foundation for the team, and creates the expectation that the team needs to take it deeper from there.
Can I just add on to what Carol just said? I'm not sure if you all heard about the Tuckman model. You all on this panel, they know the Tuckman model: forming, storming, norming, and performing. So in what Carol was saying, it's definitely true. And then there's a part of it before that, is making sure when you're bringing your teams together, they're going to go through these different stages. They're going to form, and then that's when they're going to get to know each other. Hopefully, when you're putting a team together, everyone already knows the position that they're playing. And there's an understanding that, we all have a role to play. And as a leader, I know what my team skill sets are, and they already know what their positions are. But then when you're bringing that team together, they're going to form, they're going to get to know each other, they're going to build relationship, they're going to storm, they're going to step on each other's toes, they're going to, maybe argue a little bit, and then they're going to norm. They're going to figure out how to work well together because there's an outcome, right? There's an outcome we're trying to achieve. And then they're going to perform, and then sometimes they'll adjourn, and sometimes they'll mourn the loss that they're breaking up as a team. But there is a process, there is a journey that they'll all go through. But if the leader is who I believe that they are, and they know those skill sets of empowering, inspiring, coaching, and training the team, those teams will be successful, and they'll definitely find their way with the team lead laying the foundation for them.
No, some great points. And as you're talking, I was just thinking, like, the analogy that I think of, and like I'm involved with high level, high performance sports, it's like sport teams. Like, you'll have the coach will set the standards, and but the team on the field, they've got to work together. Mistakes are going to happen. They've got to work through those things. That's sort of a classic example. So anything more on that one? No? Okay, we'll move on to the next one. Look, we've already gone through 24 minutes. It goes so fast, these panels. I'm just wondering, Vera, just the perspective of, like, you know, we many organisations work in this big global context, and I'm just wondering, since you're from a different country like myself, cultural sort of context, does it influence dealing with vulnerability with leadership, you know, across countries, across cultures? Have you seen differences working with people in different countries?
Yeah, I actually think that this is a very important topic because cultural differences, I mean, we all know that they are there. We cannot get rid of them. We can only make people aware of them. And especially when it comes to vulnerability, I think it's a very big topic. So just looking at Europe versus, for example, the US, you can really see how in the US there's a lot more space for this kind of vulnerability because it's more okay to make a mistake and then learn from it and continue. Whereas in Europe, there is still this idea that making a mistake means you are a failure and you better disappear from the surface. And you can also see this by looking at how our politics work. There is no forgiveness for any type of mistake. And this is obviously something that in an organization you take forward. So our organization has both. We have European locations and offices as well as in the US. So obviously we do have that cultural difference where we see vulnerability is a lot less accepted, especially, for example, in Switzerland, also a very conservative country where we have our headquarters. Showing vulnerability in such a country and being there as a leader saying, hey, I've made a mistake, or hey, I'm not really sure about this, but you're the expert on the team, you can tell me. This is not something that is a standard and not something that is easy to foster. So working on this with what we have, also a male-dominated industry as aerospace is, it's even more so difficult because you don't only just have the intercultural differences, but also obviously differences from when you look at more feminine and more masculine characteristics that also look at vulnerability a little bit different. So I would say yes, 100%. This will be looking different in every country. A great model also for those who are listening to use to look at where does your country versus another one stand is also Hofstede. I can highly recommend that. They also have online tools to check on these kind of things. And that makes it easier then to work together within a team, especially when you work cross-cultural.
Yeah, some great points. Thanks, Vera. Anyone else want to add on to that? No. All right. Well, let's move on to, like, now. I think we've defined it from lots of different perspectives, and I just want to just quickly go about some of the, I guess, the benefits. And so, and I'll start with you, Tammy. So in your role, like, how have you observed vulnerability improving team dynamics and trust, the things that we're trying to do here? What sort of examples would you have?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this is my bias, but I feel like there's no downside to vulnerability in a team environment. It's just going to create more collaboration, opportunities to lean and rely on each other to grow and learn from each other, develop each other. So as an outside, consultant coming into companies, I get brought in oftentimes to either train and educate on a specific topic, but ultimately underneath that is always some kind of a team builder component. Like, how can I bring my people together to better understand each other? And that at the heart of it all is what we're talking about here. So I think the more vulnerability that you have amongst the team, whether it's leader down or side to side across the team or whatever it looks like, is going to create the ability to say, I need help. Or you appear to maybe need some help. Let me step in and help you out. Or to also better understand, styles and approaches. Some people like to figure it out on their own and then come back at it. Or, so I think the more that you know each other, and ultimately, that's my new definition of vulnerability, is like knowing each other, right? But I think, the more that that's there, the stronger the team environment will be.
Thanks, Timmy. Anyone want to add on to that one?
One of the things that I've seen be successful, and we've talked a little bit about how much is too much vulnerability, and I think a good place to start is using a level of vulnerability and presenting that to the team in order to solve a business problem. The dynamics of business are changing extremely rapidly. We had a downside in the tech sector last year. I was in banking, and our banking sector took a huge hit as well. And there were just a lot of pivots that businesses need to make due to the changing climate and landscape. And I think putting that out there, a leader has an opportunity to put that out there to their team to think about and think through what are some options. If these business conditions persist or change, how can we solve the problems that are faced by our business? And I think that can be a very safe um, way to start the vulnerability conversation. Because of the pace of change is so rapid, people shouldn't be expected to have all the answers. And having multiple perspectives may give you opportunities to meet a challenge before you take that bend in the road and are faced with it head on. So I like to start with, hey, is there a business problem that you could put to the team and get their input on how we would solve this as an organization or as a team?
Thanks, Karen. Any more on that one? No. All right. We'll move on to the next one. So, Dr. Gina, I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on how leadership vulnerability can impact just the well-being and inclusiveness from a HR perspective in organizations.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So, leadership vulnerability can definitely have a significant impact on employee well-being. When someone had asked a question earlier about imposter syndrome and vulnerability, and I just want to just maybe include that in what I'm going to say here is
Yeah.
from my perspective and from how I work with my clients here in the US, vulnerability is the willingness to show your true self, including your emotions, negative and positive, your fears, insecurities to other people. It's definitely a part of having that emotional intelligence, know thyself, and then being able to know other people as well and their vulnerability, their emotions, their perspectives. It involves being open and authentic, like we talked about before. But imposter syndrome is something different. It's a psychological pattern where individuals doubt themselves, they doubt their accomplishments, and they have a constant fear of being exposed as a fraud, as not really knowing what they're doing, and despite their evidence of competence. And so it often leads to feelings of inadequacy. And so as leaders, number one, you want to know the difference between true vulnerability and maybe having feelings of imposter syndromes. And if you are having feelings of imposter syndrome, you may want to work with someone, whether it be a coach or a therapist, to help you work through those feelings and maybe get to the root of what's driving that. And work on some transformational change techniques. When leaders demonstrate their vulnerability and they share their own challenges, their own experiences, and their own uncertainties and emotions, it creates that culture, as I think it was Carol that said this, that psychological safety in the workplace. The openness of it fosters that trust that I keep talking about and that authenticity that we've all been talking about. And employees feel more valued, they feel more supportive, they feel more relaxed in their organization. And when leaders show vulnerability, then they will begin to show vulnerability and improve their the overall workplace morale, their motivation, overall well-being. Everyone feels safe. Everyone feels that they can trust and really talk to one another and actually be heard by each other. So I definitely like to encourage for employees and leaders in particular to be open, to be vulnerable, to show their human side. And if we're able to embrace and be that positive example, you'll see a lot different organizations if everyone has that feeling that they can be open and honest with one another without hurting one another.
No, a lot in that, and all the great points. I think essentially, yeah, if we can just be ourselves, we're going to feel better about that, aren't we?
Can I just add really quick to
Yeah,
that?
of course.
Dr. Gina, that's such a robust and beautiful answer. I want to just add one more specific thing for individuals on listening to kind of focus in on. And we talk a lot more these days around the employee experience and it being a holistic view versus the job and the function of the job and the things that go into it. So I just want to encourage everyone to do a little mini Google for the wellness wheel. It really gets into this nice like roundabout view of what that employee experience looks like and what the employee needs to have that safe and inclusive environment. So yes, I think community is at the core of it all, right? It was one of the first words out of my mouth, but I think we have to look at it and remember that it's a multifaceted thing that we have to pay attention to when it comes to employees feeling safe, to have their whole well-being, their wellness really cared for, and inclusion for sure there too.
Thanks, Timmy.
I'll add on to something I saw in the comments. There was a question around I'll use my words, favoritism. So if I'm a leader and I'm really vulnerable with one person on my team, but not so much with another, is that going to create problems? And, the short answer to that is probably yes, but it's a qualified yes, right? One of the things that I think is really going back to that listening and understanding your audience and what your team members may be comfortable with or not. And so there may be a level of vulnerability that a leader can go to and having more personal conversations because they're more comfortable with one colleague versus another. Or it's also based on what the colleague is comfortable having a conversation around, right? So you need to be respectful of those boundaries. And I'll just go back to, I think that's where a lot of that nuance and testing the waters and really being understanding and listening, and also paying attention to how people are receiving the messages that you're putting out there for them.
Some extra good points there, Carol, as well. All right, so we might move on, and I'll come to Vera this time, so getting ready. And we've probably covered a lot of this already, but I just want to unpack it just a little bit more, and that is just describing some specific behaviours that leaders exhibit when creating an open and inclusive environment. So I think we've covered a bit of this, but just cover it as a specific question. So
yes,
over to you.
I feel like we've just over the past question have covered the majority of specific behaviors, maybe not placed as such now. Obviously, being an inclusive environment having an inclusive environment is a little bit different than showing vulnerability. Vulnerability will add to creating an inclusive environment, but having that goes beyond vulnerability, which I also think is very important to place here. It's obviously a lot about being someone as a manager, actively listen to your team and what they need. Be there as a sparring partner and not just someone that they come to once they have something ticked off, but really be someone that can help them as well in specific situations. You want to play on people's strengths without disregarding their weaknesses also. So having that inclusive environment means looking at everyone, including their educational background, including the heritage, and play with their strengths and bring them into the team, because this is really what makes people shine as well. And I think this is often something that is a bit forgotten when we talk about vulnerability, that also means showing, obviously, authentically who you are, and allowing your team to show authentically who they are. So these are all behaviors that I would expect from a leader to exhibit. Obviously, encourage collaboration, encourage open communication, which is very open and honest communication, but candid. And I think this is something that's also not so easy and has to be taught, how to give feedback, how to receive feedback, how to accept that. And these are all things that we would also take forward in leadership programs and talk about how can you learn these behaviors? How can you display these behaviors? How can you practically apply them with your team and by yourself, or towards also your own managers? And this is something, I think there's no simple answer to that, because it's very diverse. It's a very diverse skill set you need to create that. And it's not just about your own behavior, but it's also about the company culture. If you're a very open leader, but the company culture really fosters retaliation when you make a mistake, then you're going to have a very hard time creating that inclusive environment within the team. So there's always two sides to that coin or that card. And I think that's what we really have to take in consideration, moving that into more executive levels and making sure that there's a top-down support for creating this environment.
Yeah. And I want to, were you going to say something, Rod?
No, it's okay. You go. Okay.
Yes, and yes, Vera. Yes, yes to all of it. Also, promote growth. I saw in the chat that a lot of people are saying, can we use a different word than vulnerability? And vulnerability has a negative connotation. I'm here to tell you that the word vulnerability is not, by the sound of my voice, everyone, it is not a negative word. Okay? When you think of vulnerability, it's not a negative word. It's not a sign of weakness. It's actually a sign of growth. It's a sign of someone who is willing to be open, to be willing to learn, grow, and advance. Someone who is willing. It's really a strength. So when you look at the word vulnerability, you are promoting growth within your organization. And so if you do that, if you look at it that way, it's just like when people feel like self-care is selfish. Self-care is not selfish. Acting in one's own best interest is not a selfish behavior. So vulnerability is not a weak behavior. It's actually a strong behavior. So when you look at it and you shift and you reframe it, then you will begin to look at it, and it frees you to be able to have more open dialogue with your coworkers, with your staff, and with other leaders. It gives you an opportunity to have authentic conversations. And Vera's right. If you start from the top, and if the top is willing to be open, willing to foster inclusion and collaboration within organizations, you won't have these feelings of retaliation and all of these negative things going on, if that's what the company wants to foster. And also, and if a company doesn't align with your values as an employee, or even its own values as an organization, then you may have to rethink that organization for yourself, because it's also about caring for ourselves and doing what's best for our own mental and emotional well-being. Because this is also about this workshop is about how openness can foster trust, inclusion, and well-being. It's about employees' well-being, leaders' well-being, all of our well-being.
That's real gold there. I think you've hit the nail on the head there. It's so much about growth. Last night I ran a panel about empathy. It's, if you've got a place where you can be vulnerable, it means you've got an opportunity of that empathy. And this month is all about mental health. So if you got that support, I think what you said was spot on exactly. So thank you for sharing that. Anyone else want to add on to that?
I just want to double down on what Dr. Gina just said. Vulnerability is not weakness, it is strength. And I've actually also written an article on that last year in February. Happy also to share that in the comments later. It's something that is such a misconception. Being able to show vulnerability is so courageous and so brave if you do that as a leader, because it shows that you are not perfect. And we are all not perfect. There is no such a thing. I said that in the beginning of this call, right? And for me, this is one of the biggest things that someone can do, is to come and say, hey, I fucked up. I know it wasn't my mistake. I'm sorry. I will learn from it, because this doesn't show that you're weak. It shows that you are, as Gino said, you are growing. You have a growth mindset. You're able to learn. You're able to take something bad, maybe that happened, and turn it around to something positive. And having that ability is so detrimental to grow as a human being, not just at work, but really as a human being. And that's what I really want to double down on, that it's not vulnerability that is weak. It's the perception and this misconception that we have, that we need to change, and we need to change the tonality around that this is courageous, this is strength, this is how you really grow. And only if you show that, you can really be a complete leader, in my opinion, at least.
No, really good. All right, well, we'll move on, because we've now got, golly gosh, not that long to go, 13 minutes. So if we talk about just applying this, and a lot of our audience will be HR professionals. So I'll come to you, Carol. I'm just wondering, what sort of advice would you give HR practitioners looking to really fostering this vulnerability with leadership, trust, inclusion, welfare in their organisation? So what's some suggestions for them?
When I think about what are some of the steps that HR practitioners can take, I think about it both from a macro level and a more micro level within an organization. You just heard Dr. Gina and Vera talk a lot about it has to come from the top, and it has to be the tenor and the tone through the whole organization. And I think if HR practitioners are in a position where they're interfacing regularly with senior leadership, I think of my role as an HR executive as oftentimes being that conscience for the organization. So holding the mirror up and saying, hey, our values say that we ascribe to have great teamwork, but yet we have this incentive plan over here that creates this kind of individualistic backstabbing behavior. Is that okay? Do we, there may be a reason for that, but let's go into this and do it intentionally if we're getting unintended consequences to something that's created within the organization, right? So I think about HR practitioners having the ability to take that approach and think about how practices are woven through the organization, share those with leadership, and make sure they're setting that tone at the top. The second place where I think HR practitioners can really lend a hand is at that team level and individual level, and really providing some insights, coaching around those specific behaviors, bringing in educational opportunities for people to be able to develop and nurture those inclusive, trusting skill sets. So, you can work again at that organizational level. You can work with an individual team, and at the same time gather perspective on, maybe what are the behaviors that we as an organization really need to double down on and create some more robust training opportunities, and then think about who may be struggling in a particular area that might need some one-on-one coaching around that, because it doesn't rise to the level of being an organizational issue we need to attack. It's simply something that we need to do to support this particular leader or manager within the organization.
I want to add something to everything that Carol said, because that true synergy. My company, my consulting company in Los Angeles, our tagline is, "We make the culture match the brand." So we make sure that the company that you say you are externally matches who you say you are internally. So as HR professionals, you should know that, number one, what's the company's mission, vision, values? And is the company from the top down is in alignment with that brand identity? And if not, why not? And begin, HR professionals, start working with your leadership, your C-suite, to make sure that everyone is in understanding and everyone is in alignment with who we are as an organization. And then start to build once you have that strategy and once you have that understanding, then begin to build your programming around that, to make sure that every employee, because that's another way that you build that trust, that transparency, that authenticity within your organization. If everyone knows who the company is, what they believe in, what they stand for, and who they're for. So I just wanted to add that. But everything else Carol said, spot on.
Very good. All right. I might move on because we have time. Now we'll also have other leaders from other parts of the business in the audience. So I thought maybe I'd come to you, Tammy, just what practical steps can leaders themselves take about implementing vulnerable practices in their teams?
Yeah, I think I want to sound a little bit like a broken record, but I think to be a vulnerable leader, to have that quality, right, you have to have a focus on humanity. And so I think a huge part of that is using the skill or quality of listening to ourselves, listening to others, listening to the environment. So I think as a leader, if you want to, create more of a vulnerable practice or culture around you, first and foremost have to listen to yourself. Where do I have my own gaps and challenges or areas where I can maybe express more or pay attention to what's going on for other people? Where can I create more conversations, whether it's one-on-one or in a group setting? One practical tool that I love is having a team meeting that's not about the work, but is a storytelling session where you're having people come in and share what's going on in their world. And just allowing people to have more of that human-centric approach into what's going on and how the team is coming together. And that can happen virtually, it can happen in person, small group, big group. It's just creating more of those opportunities for listening for self and others.
Thanks, Tammy. Anyone want to add on to that?
I'd like to just add on to that. I mean, Tammy touched on it, and she also said it's about being human, right? So having a vulnerable practice for me also, or something that I always tell leaders to do, is be human, but not just about your work. I've made that mistake myself earlier in my career, where I was actually very unapproachable as a manager because I was just there as the work Vera. I was not the person that I am as well. And I understand that there's always, and Carol spoke to that earlier, there's always obviously the silver lining between how much do you share about you as a private person and what do you not share. But if you don't share anything, then people cannot connect to you because people don't know who you are. People only have that robotic performing manager in front of them without any human touch points. So even sharing little things like sports you'd like to do, some food you'd like to eat, these things already make you so much more human and more approachable, and start creating that environment where you have safety, where you can build trust. And it's such a little thing and such a little detail, but it makes a really, really big difference. So take that into consideration as leader. Don't be a robot, be a human.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks, Vera. And maybe, I guess my next question was probably along the lines of that. I was going to ask Dr. Gina just about how to create a safe space for sharing that enables what we're talking about. Like, what are some tips for that?
Thank you. We've said a lot today, and we've said a lot of the same things, but again, it's about establishing trust, encouraging that open communication, foster that open door policy where individuals feel welcome to come in and voice their thoughts, concerns, and ideas without hesitation. Embrace your own vulnerability. And remember, vulnerability is not a good thing. Lead by example, by being open and vulnerable yourself and sharing your own experiences. Set the ground rules. Establish clear guidelines on respectful communications and proper behavior. Emphasize the importance of active listening, empathy, and validating other people's perspectives. Remember, you don't have to agree. You can understand. Provide support if necessary. Offers resources such as counseling or coaching or mentorship programs. If you have an EAP, an employee assistance program to support individuals who may need additional help and support. Celebrate diversity, embrace diversity and inclusion. And remember, diversity and inclusion is not just about race and gender. It's about valuing and respecting all differences, backgrounds, and experiences. Encourage a culture of acceptance and mutual organizations. Let people be who they are, be their true authentic self. It may not be who you are, but it's who they are. So accept that and be understanding in that. And then lastly, I would say have a feedback mechanism. Create feedback channels for individuals to express their thoughts on effectiveness. Create that safe space and allow them to suggest improvements to ensure ongoing support and inclusivity. Get everyone involved. And if you do that, you can definitely make sure that your culture in your organization matches the brand identity.
You're really good again. Thank you. All right, so we've got a few minutes left, so we might just go around the room and just what's just one point you want to leave the audience with, and we'll go, I guess, go around. Maybe we'll go anti-clockwise. So we'll go Vera first. How about that?
I feel like if there's one thing that I want to leave the audience with is look at vulnerability as strength and showing vulnerability as being courageous.
Very good. Carol.
My takeaway today is going to be something that Tammy shared, and it's not a broken record, but it really resonated with me when you talk about it's just, if you need a different terminology from vulnerability, think of it as just a way of being human. And I think that is a really natural for everyone. We are all human. We come at it different ways. And so just being human is one way I think people can really wrap their head around this concept of vulnerability.
Yeah. Thanks, Carol. And Tammy?
Carol took the words right out of my mouth. No, I think it is right. It is about humanity and looking at the whole person, self and others, and knowing that when we do that, the best results will follow. The collaboration, the quality of work, the innovation, creativity, the inclusion, all the things, right? So if we can look at whole people, to Vera's point, not just the work people, right? The whole people, good things will come.
Yeah. Thanks, Tammy. And Dr. Gina.
Everything that everyone said, everyone, you got this. We've given you some really great tips and information. There's nothing more that I can add except you got this. And everything is going to be fine. And I look forward to hearing on LinkedIn and other places all the inclusive and collaborative and great and fun organizations out there. And I can't wait to hear all the excitement. But thanks again for having me.
Yeah, and thanks for all the panelists. I think it's been a great conversation. I think I think really what I've heard is, when you start sharing your own personal stories, that was a good addition, and your challenges at work, it really does help create a safe space for people to really open up. I think when I think of vulnerability as well, I think so many movies and that I love anyway, and maybe many others, is where you see someone go through a setback and then they work as a group, they overcome that, and it's really inspiring and sharing those experiences. So everybody can have that movie, at their work together. And that's what comes with being vulnerable and working as a group. So thank you, everyone, and look forward to talking to you and discussing future panel topics with you as well. So thanks, everyone. Bye. Thank you.